The New York Times reported basically raccoon dogs for the win. It's their fault. COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, it's the raccoon dogs after all.
But not frozen this time.
No, not frozen. It's the fault of those crazy Chinese people who trade them. Now it's not racist, right? To blame the Chinese people and their trade of wildlife that they definitely shouldn't be trading. Now this is the honorable thing. So the New York Times, in their article, headlined, "New Data Links Pandemic's Origins to Raccoon Dogs at Wuhan Market," which came out on the 16th, March 16th, 2 days ago. The first paragraph reads, "An international team of virus experts," just stop there, "An international team of virus experts. An international team of virus experts said on Thursday that they had found genetic data from a market in Wuhan, China, linking the coronavirus with raccoon dogs for sale there, adding evidence to the case that the worst pandemic in a century could have been ignited by an infected animal that was being dealt through the illegal wildlife trade." And you have to go down pretty far in the article to discover that the players involved are a lot of the same players that we've become familiar with. Now, it's Christian Andersen leading up the team. He's one of the international members of the international team of virus experts. And then you have playing sort of, wingman to the wingman is Angela Rasmussen. And it's just, the same people with the same conclusions over and over and over again. And this New York Times article is actually particularly bad. But as it turns out, they just borrowed most of it from The Atlantic. So we've talked before about The Atlantic Monthly's reporting on SARS-CoV-2, which has been abominable. And they've got this small team of 3 or 4, happens to be all women reporters that are just doing this like gossipy coffee klatch stuff that sort of sounds sciencey, but really never is.
The abominable snow job.
Abominable snow job, indeed. So it's one of them, again, in The Atlantic, writing, and so we talked about this explicitly in November of 2021 on episode 105, what's going on at The Atlantic, but they are still at it. So here I'm going to, and again, wish I could show you my screen here, but read you just some highlighted sections from the Atlantic article called "The Strongest Evidence Yet That an Animal Started the Pandemic. A New Analysis of Genetic Samples from China Appears to Link the Pandemic's Origin to Raccoon Dogs" by Catherine J. Wu. This was published somehow the same day as the New York Times article was published, even though the New York Times cites The Atlantic as having been the source of this. So.
See earlier point about the weird coordination across institutions.
Yes, indeed. Updated the following day, that is to say yesterday, March 17th. I don't know what was updated. But there's this whole piece is worth reading if you can stomach it, but I'm just going to read the pieces that I've highlighted here. I'll start with, what is the evidence anyway? Like, what has happened that we are now so certain that it's raccoon dogs of Nordic origin, right?
Must be powerful evidence.
Oh, it's powerful. It's going to be powerful. For 3 years now, the article begins. The debate, this is the article by Wu in the Atlantic Monthly published this week. For 3 years now, the debate over the origins of the coronavirus pandemic has ping-ponged between 2 big ideas: that SARS-CoV-2 spilled into human populations directly from a wild animal source, and that the pathogen leaked from a lab. Through a swirl of data obfuscation by Chinese authorities and politicalization within the United States, and rampant speculation from all corners of the world, many scientists have stood by the notion that this outbreak, like most others, had purely natural roots. But that hypothesis has been missing a key piece of proof: genetic evidence from the Hunan seafood wholesale market in Wuhan, China, showing that the virus had infected creatures for sale there. Now, an international team of virologists, genomicists, and evolutionary biologists may have finally found crucial data to help fill that knowledge gap. A new analysis of genetic sequences collected from the market shows that raccoon dogs being illegally sold at the venue could have been carrying and possibly shedding the virus at the end of 2019. Let me just slow down here. A new analysis of genetic sequences collected from the market shows that raccoon dogs being illegally sold at the venue could have been carrying and possibly shedding the virus at the end of 2019. That's the evidence. Wait.
Okay.
It's some of the strongest support yet, experts told me, that the pandemic began when SARS-CoV-2 hopped from animals into humans rather than an accident among scientists experimenting with viruses. This really strengthens the case for a natural origin, says Seema Lakdawala, apologies for the pronunciation, a virologist at Emory University who wasn't involved in the research. Angela Rasmussen, a virologist involved in the research, told me, this is a really strong indication that animals at the market were infected. There's really no other explanation that makes any sense.
Really, Angie?
Shall I go on? Do you want to intersperse
Well, I think
before
there are a couple
there's a
things
lot
here.
more to say, but yeah.
One, the idea that this is the strongest evidence yet may actually be true, even though there is really essentially no evidence here other than the presence of the animal in the location that they want us to believe it started in.
And there's some, and we'll get here, but there's some sequences that have the genome of the raccoon dog and the genome of the virus that show up in the same place.
Right.
At the same time, ish.
Right. The kind of evidence that implies that the people in the World Trade Center may have brought it down themselves because their DNA was present in the crime scene. But also notice the linguistic turn of phrase there, where the point is what we've been waiting for is evidence that it came from the Wuhan lab. I mean, the Wuhan seafood market.
Yes. That is the piece that is missing. That is the piece. And my God, there's so much here. Like, as far as I can tell, like this is the scientific evidence at this point. There's not even a frickin' paper to look at.
Oh,
there's nothing. It's not, oh, it's only on a preprint server. Like, no, it doesn't exist yet.
Well, it doesn't exist yet, and yet you have two major publications trumpeting it. And we've seen this before with COVID. We saw this with the Together trial that supposedly showed that ivermectin was ineffective against COVID, where we had that result 6 months before we were able to look at the methodology of the paper that was trumpeted in major headlines. That's right. And so this is not even unpeer-reviewed, right? You've got peer-reviewed where something has been scrutinized and then it is presented to the public. You've got unpeer-reviewed where it's put on a preprint server and nobody has scrutinized it ahead of time. And
but
then
it's presented so that other scientists and anyone else who wants to can assess.
Yes.
There's no assessment possible.
It's not possible. The point is what they've done is they've decided to give us the conclusion in advance of us being able to scrutinize how they reached it, which suggests that that conclusion may not be based on a robust methodology.
Why would they want to do that, though? Why would they want to start with a conclusion?
Well,
what possible interest could they have in starting with a conclusion?
Interesting. Now, some people will remember that Christian Anderson was in fact initially the person who called Anthony Fauci's attention to the fact that the genome of the virus in question was, in his words, inconsistent with predictions from evolutionary theory from a natural origin. Fauci then, in some way,
but he's seen the light.
Well, he has seen the light. For those of you just listening, I'm making that gesture that people make when they're handling money.
Does anyone actually do that with money, though?
I have never seen film of Christian Anderson doing this, but there is actually evidence of a tremendous amount of money having flowed to him, to his boss, Eric Topol. Yes, that Eric Topol at the Scripps Institute.
That's an expert I can really get behind trusting, can't you?
I am somewhat behind in trusting Eric Topol. I just think he may have a conflict of interest the size of the International Space Station. But anyway, the idea that we are being told, that we have multiple journalistic sources that are reporting, it's so urgent.
More.
Yeah, it's so urgent that we know the conclusion from this study that they have to publish on it before we're even allowed to look at it.
Well, that Department of Energy stuff that came out and said, like, actually, we're not sure at all, but like it really kind of seems like it could be a lab leak. They had to get right on top of that. So here we have these sort of glowing endorsements in pseudoscience-y language, and I don't know I have never run into, as far as I know, before the work of the author of the New York Times piece, but this, like, the Atlantic just created this stable of pseudoscience journalists reporting on pseudoscience that did their work over and over and over and over again during this pandemic, for the last 3 years, and they just haven't veered. They just have not looked outside of their lane. They picked the lane and they are staying in it, and there's nothing to indicate that lane is reflective of reality or truth. Shall I read a few more bits from
Absolutely.
this? It's a long article. The genetic sequences were pulled out of swabs taken in and near market stalls around the pandemic start. So that's the source of the evidence. The new analysis, led by Christian Anderson, Edward Holmes, and Michael Waraby, 3 prominent researchers who have been looking into the virus's roots, shows that may not be the case. May not be the case being no animal host for SARS-CoV-2 can be deduced. Within about half a day of downloading the data from GISAID, this is not a database I am familiar with, and so I'm not actually sure how it's normally pronounced, but GISAID, it's an open access genomic database, data were posted there, and this team happened to get lucky and pull it, and then the data disappeared again, and no one can figure out what's going on there. So that also is strange. Maybe everyone just got lucky. Maybe. Within about half a day of downloading the data from GISAID, the trio and their collaborators discovered that several market samples that tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 were also coming back chock full of animal genetic material, much of which was a match for the common raccoon dog, a small animal related to foxes that has a raccoon-like face. Finding the genetic material of virus and mammal so closely commingled, enough to be extracted out of a single swab, isn't perfect proof, Lakdawala told me. It's an important step. I'm not going to diminish that, she said. Still, the evidence falls short of, say, isolating SARS-CoV-2 from a free-ranging raccoon dog, or even better, uncovering a viral sample swabbed from a mammal for sale at Hunan from the time of the outbreak's onset. Still, the findings don't stand alone. Do I believe there were infected animals at the market? Yes, I do, Anderson told me. So this is just a statement of belief. Mm-hmm. It's not based, it's simply a statement of belief.
Statement of belief.
It's a statement of belief. Do I believe there are infected animals at the market? Yes, I do, Anderson told me. Does this new data add to that evidence base? Yes, end quote. The new analysis builds on extensive previous research that points to the market as the source of the earliest major outbreak of SARS-CoV-2, Here's the evidence she's going to trot out. Many of the earliest known COVID-19 cases of the pandemic were clustered roughly in the market's vicinity, and the virus's genetic material was found in many samples swabbed from carts and animal processing equipment at the venue, as well as parts of nearby infrastructure such as storehouses, sewage wells, and water drains. That's 2 pieces of evidence, neither of which are evidence, not extensive research. Raccoon dogs, creatures commonly bred for sale in China, are also already known to be one of many mammal species that can easily catch and spread the coronavirus. All of this left one main hole in the puzzle to fill. Clear-cut evidence the raccoon dogs and the virus were in the exact same spot at the market, close enough that the creatures might have been infected and possibly infectious. That's what the new analysis provides. They could really use someone who understands anything about evolution or how viruses might actually move between species, don't you think?
No, I think that would screw up their whole plan of selling us the idea that the seafood market is the likely origin of the human pandemic.
All of this left one main hole in the puzzle to fill?
Right.
Okay, think of it as finding the DNA of an investigation's main suspect at the scene of the crime. The findings don't rule out the possibility that other animals may have been carrying SARS-CoV-2 at Hunan. Raccoon dogs, if they were infected, may not even be the creatures who passed the pathogen on to us. Well, then why are we talking about them? Okay, that's not in the article. I'm editorializing now. Which means the search for the virus's many wild hosts will need to plod on. Do we know the intermediate host was raccoon dogs? No. Anderson wrote to me, using the term for an animal that can ferry a pathogen between other species. Is it high up on my list of potential hosts? Yes, but it's definitely not the only one. So now we're kind of backing off from this giant, like, oh, the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly is going to tell us that now we have this evidence. It's raccoon dogs. Well, except maybe not, but it could be. So we've now backed off 2/3 of the way or so through this article to, maybe, but isn't this cool? Quote, at this point, it's still unclear why the sequences were so recently posted to GISAID. They also vanished from the database shortly after the international team of researchers notified the Chinese researchers of their preliminary findings, without explanation. They go on and on and on. There's really no explanation. Skeptics will likely be eager to poke holes in the team's new findings. Pointing out, for instance,
I don't think they need to be poked. I think there are plenty of holes in those findings. They don't require any of us skeptics.
We've been shared. We've had nothing shared with us. There's no findings except that we've been told.
We've been told swabs had DNA from the raccoon dogs and genetic sequences from the virus in close proximity in a market where sick people undoubtedly commingled with animals that they were buying.
You sound like a skeptic. Skeptics will likely be eager to poke holes in the team's new findings, pointing out, for instance, that it's technically possible for genetic material from viruses and animals to end up sloshed together in the environment, even if an infection didn't take place. Maybe an infected human visited the market and inadvertently deposited viral RNA near an animal's crate. How dare they? But an infected animal with no third-party contamination still seems by far the most plausible explanation for the sample's genetic contents, several experts told me. Other scenarios require contortions of logic and, more important, additional proof. We're almost there.
All right.
The debate over SARS-CoV-2's origins has raged for nearly as long as the pandemic itself. Okay, I don't even get the rest of the sentence. Outlasting lockdowns, widespread masking, even the first version of the COVID vaccines. I don't know what that's doing there. And as long as there is murkiness to cling to, it may never fully resolve. When President Joe Biden asked the U.S. intelligence community to review the matter, 4 government agencies and the National Intelligence Council pointed to a natural origin, while 2 others guessed that it was a lab leak. Okay. Finally, end of this crap piece in The Atlantic. If this new level of scientific evidence does conclusively tip the origins debate toward the animal route, it will be, in one way, a major letdown. It will mean that SARS-CoV-2 breached our borders because we once again mismanaged our relationship with wildlife. That we failed to prevent this epidemic for the same reason we failed, and could fail again, to prevent so many of the rest.
Frankly, I predicted that. If they manage to sell us on this story that this has a natural origin, then the point is the lesson of the pandemic is the inverse. Not you must not do the kind of research that turns the world upside down, but in fact you have to do more of that research because we missed it, by this much. We were studying these viruses, but we didn't get ahead of this thing and it got us anyway. So next time we need to have done much more of this gain of function research in order to be ready. That's what they're going to sell us.
It's even worse than that.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
My turn. Yeah. No, so that for sure, but also don't go out into nature. It's dangerous. There's wild things out there and they will give you diseases. Stay inside, be safe. It's clean. We've got some antibacterial spray for you, antiviral spray, anti-everything spray. You just get right in that comfortable little zone of yours. We'll stream some crap into your face that you can watch and be entertained by, but for God's sake, don't go outside. It's dangerous out there.
Yes, don't unplug from our mechanism of narrative control. So I wanted to give an interpretation. You wondered about their claim of the natural origin having outlasted something about vaccines, masks, et cetera, et cetera, et
It's
cetera.
just a weird thing to
Well, but no, I know what they're getting at.
Okay. In this case, the they is a she.
Well,
Okay. It's part of the bigger thing.
That's a earlier point regarding the emergent nature of the they she complex that advances the phony narrative.
We're not going to talk about cats again, are we?
No, we're done with that for the moment.
Okay.
No, we're on to raccoon dogs having.
Wait, do they have pronouns too?
You'll have to ask them, but I will say that this is a major leap forward from the frozen ferret badger steaks that they failed to convince us were the source.
About the great leap forward and talking about the origins of this virus?
I guess. I mean, make of it what you will.
Okay.
But okay. But what really is going on here is there are a couple of narratives that are disproportionately important. And this is a subtle point, I think. But in some cases, we have succeeded in staring down their garbage narratives, right? Safe and effective is not a phrase you hear regularly used about the vaccines anymore. We're into much more nuanced territory. We're still lagging behind the reality of what is apparent in the data, but nonetheless. But there are certain there are certain narratives with an undead nature to them. right? And I, in fact, would call the kind of journalism that you're talking about, instead of burying the lead, it's exhuming the lead. They keep resurrecting
Their lead. Exhuming
because
their lead.
they cannot afford to have it die, right? To the extent that the world keeps discovering. I mean, we keep getting new agencies, people who were on the commission who, Jeffrey Sachs has announced that he saw nothing but corruption in the commission that was trying to find the origins. We've got all of these things that would ordinarily cause a regular person to say, you know what, that Wuhan seafood market explanation turned out to be nuts. All sorts of people with all sorts of different kinds of expertise have converged on the idea that this does seem to have emerged from the lab right there in Wuhan, etc.
Outbreak of chocolatey goodness.
Right. But the point is they can't afford to let it go. And I don't think that they think they're going to win this one. But I think what they have to do is muddle it, right? This is the doubt component of a fear, uncertainty, and doubt campaign. The point is they need to have some alternative that remains live so that the people who have been so thoroughly embarrassed by the failure of that garbage narrative have something to say. Oh, well, I'm on Team Atlantic, New York Times, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, don't you know that they found the DNA of the,
Raccoon dogs.
They found the DNA of the raccoon dogs along with genetic material from SARS-CoV-2, which, of course, if you're paying attention, you know that at the point that these things were being swabbed for in the Wuhan seafood market, likely the disease had been circulating in Wuhan since September or October of 2019. It's no surprise that there was SARS-CoV-2 all over the Wuhan seafood market, which means it's going to be commingled with every single organism that was in that market, right? There's no evidence here. Much less something that they would let us scrutinize. But the point is that narrative and the ivermectin turned out not to work narrative, these are two narratives that they are never going to let die. Doesn't matter what the evidence says. They need both of them, right?
Yeah. And they've got Confederates like Rasmussen saying, this is a really strong indication that animals at the market were infected. There's really no other explanation that makes any sense. This is as credentialed, on point a scientist as you could possibly be, who has made a statement that is so utterly and transparently ludicrous. And yet, here it is. Here it is in the Atlantic.
Yep.
That statement makes no sense. And yet that authority saying it will be sufficient for some number of people.
Right, and it sounds so full of meaning. No other explanation makes sense. How about somebody with COVID coughed near a raccoon dog?
I mean, how about even in this terrible article, there's other things. Like even this terrible article
presents other
cannot manage to not admit that actually, yes, this isn't the only possibility. Even Christian Andersen says this isn't clear proof.
Yeah, it's
right?
The weakest of tea. And what's more, here's some strong evidence. We haven't found the wild circulating pandemic in any creature, let alone raccoon dogs.